We're
Oh, no
excited.
problem.
Hopefully you can see the 4 students in front who are going to be kind of moderating for us, but we got a big group of about 15 of us here, and we just look forward to talking to you.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, thanks. Can you guys hear? Yes. Okay, go ahead.
Hi, Wally. So first we're going to introduce our moderators for today's discussion, and then we'll do a quick overview of your background, and then we'll jump into the article. Does that sound good?
Okay, perfect.
Awesome. So I'm Mackenzie. I'm a first-year master's student. My interests are kind of all over the place, but definitely interested in emotion and purpose and kind of how physical activity can motivate that.
My name is Warren Bryan. I'm also a first-year master's student in the sports and exercise psychology concentration. I'm interested in more of an applied approach. It's like coaching or something.
My name is Vicki Wiggins, also a first-year master's student. I'm concentrating in community youth sport development and physical activity and how it creates leadership in the youth.
Hello, my name is Jamie Newton. I'm a first-year doc student here. I'm interested in athletic identity and exercise identity.
Awesome. So we will be asking you the questions today, but we got a whole nother group here, and there's some physiology master's and PhD students, as well as psychology. And is that everyone? Cool.
Pedagogy.
What? Pedagogy too. Cool. So as we understand, your interests kind of are definitely in that exercise science. You've obviously been at Elon for quite some time. You actually spent some time. Do you teach at UNCG too as well? Hi, John.
Sort of. It's weird. I've served on a couple of thesis committees with Dr. Edna for a master's student. So I'm an adjunct, but it's not paid, and I haven't ever taught a class there.
We never pay you, right, Wally?
No.
This is just my Googling, so, you know, apologies if any understandings. But so then you definitely have also studied neuroscience and affect on physical activity. Are there any other special interests that you're working on now? I believe Dr. Ednayer said you're starting to look into concussions as well.
I've done a little bit on that. We have a big concussion program here. I've done a little bit with it. I'm not heavily involved in it, but I've read a lot about it.
Gotcha.
And then I do some consulting work. I've done some consulting work with the tennis teams here, and I'm currently working with the cross-country team to try and work on just kind of performance enhancement through mental practices and strategies, things like that.
Very cool. And so I think that's a good kind of summary to get us started. And our first question for you is, how did you decide to pick this article on by, what's the last name?
Echocaucus.
Yeah, there we go. So why did you decide to choose this article?
I know the class is more about affect and emotion and how exercise can have an impact on that. So this just recently came out, and I thought it was a very novel approach to really look at how affect can change throughout the course of exercise sessions. And it really kind of is a culmination of probably the past 20 years that Patty has been working on this stuff, and I've collaborated with him and talked to him quite a bit about this. So I thought it was a very good kind of cutting edge approach to get you guys interested in this and kind of see what's out there currently based on kind of what you've already learned about affect and emotion and that kind of information.
Definitely.
So one thing, do you have the article with you right now?
Yeah, it's on my computer.
Do you mind explaining figure 3? We just kind of wanted to.
Yeah, Dr. Ednayer sent me some questions on email, and she said that one. So,
yeah, that was good.
I was looking at that earlier this afternoon and deciphering it for myself first. So the interesting part about it is it's looking at it, it's a somewhat strange graph because it's 8 different things that they're looking at. But basically, if you think the x-axis is just whether you increased or decreased in pleasure during exercise. So if you're far to the left on the x-axis, you had a decrease in pleasure during exercise, and if you're far to the right, you had an increase. And you can see that typically the ones who were in the decreasing intensity had an increase in affect feeling throughout the course of the exercise session, and the ones who were in the increasing intensity had a decrease. And then it goes through different phases in terms of, you can see, where is that one? The post-exercise enjoyment, graph B on the top there. You can see that's just a kind of relationship between the slope versus whether they enjoyed it, they remembered enjoying it post-exercise. And there's a positive slope, and they're all significantly related. So it shows that the more positive slope you had during exercise, so it started off maybe negative but finished very positive, you tended to enjoy that more post-exercise. And then it goes through the 15 minutes post, the 24 hours post, and then a week post. And it gets stronger as you get to 24 hours and 7 days post. Particularly the post-exercise enjoyment to the forecasted pleasure of what they would think the next time they're going to do it. So it just kind of shows that that exercise session not only affects your immediate and 15 minutes after you're exercising, but 24 hours, it has a definite impact on how you remember it, and 7 days later, and what you might do in the future.
So if I go again.
Yeah.
So one of the questions that I had was, what do people really remember the 15-minute workout like a week later? And then how would that be affected by people who are actually regular exercisers? Because I exercise like a lot all the time, and I know I don't remember what happened a week ago particularly well and the effect on me.
Right. I think with these people, they probably can, because it seems like it's somewhat novel for them to exercise. Mm-hmm. So with something like that, they were like, okay, this is something pretty kind of unusual. And I'm not sure if they were prompted, but they were back in the same place to answer the question. So I think that probably brought back some memories about it. So yeah, I think for these people, it's probably reasonable. For someone who exercises a lot, yeah, I think it would be harder to do that, because you'd have more recency effects, because you might have exercised yesterday, mm-hmm. where it's unlikely these people exercised from the time that they finished the experimental day until 7 days later. So that was their last exercise session. Where somebody who exercises on a regular basis, it's like, all right, I can remember what I did this morning or what I did yesterday afternoon. What did I do last Thursday again? Yeah, it's a little bit harder to do that, because that recency, you have more things in between.
Okay, I'm actually going to go to a different question with this. But with what you're saying, then I'm wondering how you think this may go in the long term. So if people knew that this was going to happen, you would be in an increasing or decreasing intensity. Do you think that there would be the same effects? Does that make sense?
So for like if we were to do this chronically? Yes. So it's an interesting question, and it's one of those there's so many things involved in this, and it's hard to kind of give a real simple answer to that. I think the way to think about this is we have so many sedentary people, and they start exercising. A lot of people start exercising on a regular basis, but within the first 6 months, 50% of them drop out. And I think that's probably a low number, but that's the number we have. So there's lots of people who want to start, but then for whatever reasons, they stop relatively quickly. I think that's probably because they just don't enjoy the during exercise part of it. And there are other aspects to that, but I think that's a big part of it. If we can get them to start enjoying the during and remembering it positively, I think that can help keep them going for longer, so that then they may start getting into a session where they start doing something that's continuous and the same for a longer period of time. But I think this is a novel approach to try and get people started so they remember how to enjoy it. So that could turn into long-term exercise where they don't necessarily do this type of approach of decreasing intensity, but maybe they go to interval sessions, or they go to longer continuous sessions, and they're able to do that because they start enjoying it more. And you mentioned identity, so maybe it starts becoming something of who they are and who they identify. And with identity, that's kind of, once it's your identity, it's part of your identity, you're really going to want to do it then, because it's who you are. So that's the trick we have, is getting there. And I think this is a way to try and get there that's relatively new.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think that people who were in the increasing intensity group, would they have possibly had more enjoyment had the threshold not been 120? Or maybe if it had been 90 or 100, not that far over their threshold?
Maybe. There's a lot of evidence from graded exercise testing that once you start getting near that threshold, your feeling scale scores start to drop. So you start to not enjoy it nearly as much once you get near that threshold. So it definitely could have been not as negative if they didn't go above threshold, but I still think it would have been a negative slope.
Okay.
But it may not have gotten as far into negative numbers.
Yeah, that's actually the other study that we ran was talking about intensity versus kind of enjoyment level. So in terms of that, we also were talking about that in class today. Just the idea of if you're a regular chronic exerciser, do you think this study would still have benefits at all, or do you think they'd be reduced, or would there be any sort of benefit for someone who exercises regularly?
I think it depends on what your goals are.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're exercising because you want to get better at a 5K or a 10K, this isn't really going to help you much because your goals are different. Your goals are to try and get better at a 5K or a 10K. If your goals are to just enjoy the experience and do it because you know it's going to make you healthier and feel better, I think this could be something you could work into a workout on a regular basis. Maybe on one of your easier days where you start off short burst for high intensity and then gradually get easier so you remember that positive feeling at the end. Or even for somebody who's a runner who's trying to do an easy day, but they like to get a little bit of intensity in there. Maybe they do the intense short burst early and then go a little bit easier. So at the end, they're like, oh, okay, I feel kind of rejuvenated. They don't end with that, oh gosh, that was so winded, I'm beat.
Yeah.
And so a lot of it depends on what the goals of the exercise session are.
Yeah, so maybe one of the things we talked about was burnout and overtraining. So if someone's kind of getting stagnant or stale, this might be a way to kind of reintroduce pleasure.
Yeah, that definitely could be it. And to focus on how you're feeling instead of on how hard you're working or what your times are or anything along those lines.
Vicky, I think you had a question.
Yes, so typically we think of it taking about 6 months for something to become habit. So how long do you think it would need to control an exercise in order for it to impact the adherence to the exercise in general?
You'd probably need to get somewhere around 6 months or so to that point where they're doing it regularly, 3 to 4 days a week, ideally 5 days a week. But it's a matter of starting slowly so they enjoy it. One of the other aspects that I have a student looking in now and some other people have done is using feeling to prescribe intensity of exercise. So instead of saying, okay, I want you to work at a heart rate of this or an RPE of this, I want you to work so you feel good. So like a +3 on the feeling scale.
Okay.
That could be a different type of strategy, but the same idea of they feel good during it. So whatever the intensity is, I just want you to feel good. So not necessarily doing a pure decreasing intensity protocol, but say whatever your intensity is, I want you to maintain that +3. So over the course of your 30 minutes of exercise, you stay at a +3. So after 15 minutes, maybe that same intensity, you start to feel like a 2 or a 1, you're going to slow down a little bit. And that way you're kind of putting them in a ramped protocol, but not a specific ramped protocol. They're more in control of it, which also allows them to have more autonomy, which is also a benefit. Because when you feel like you have more autonomy, more control, you're more likely to enjoy it and feel like you're going to want to continue to do it. But 6 months definitely is that kind of threshold. If you can get them to do it consistently for over 6 months, they're more likely to stick with it. And it becomes part of who they are and their routine.
So one of the questions we had for you was, why do you think people are inactive, or why do you think there's a prevalence of that? And I know you mentioned that, like, goals. Do you think that a part of the reason why people are inactive is because they either go in with the wrong goals and then they're not really like dedicated to it, or do you think it's more of the fact that they're not focused on pleasure or kind of being happy during exercise?
I think all of that. So let's say you're trying to train for a 5K and you have your goal of training for a 5K to do a couch to 5K, and you do your 5K and you're done and you're like, okay, I'm done. Good, okay. Or you have a goal of losing, I want to try and lose 15 pounds because I have an event or I have a high school reunion or I have any of these things coming up. And the event happens and then they never identify with the exercise and they never start to make it part of their routine. They're just doing it solely for that goal. And then they never set another goal, and that way they stop. So they get where they want to be and then they stop and they never change it. It's the same issue with diets is people start a diet and they get to their goal and then they go right back to the same habits that got them where they were in the first place. And they never change their routines or their lifestyle stuff. So that's part of it. I read the question, it's a really complicated answer. I have the questions in front of me, and I'm trying to see that question again. Which one was it again? The rest of because there were a couple parts of the question.
Let's see here. I think we have a little bit of a different list. I'll pull it up right now. It is, you got it. So I think it's just the first question. What are your thoughts on the prevalence of physical activity and why do individuals understand the benefits do you actually change
Okay.
that?
And also related to that is the question 7, I think would be question 7 on your list.
Okay. There's a lot of reasons. It is. It's complicated because humans are strange. I mean, we are just strange. We do something the same way 95 times, and then the 96th time we decide to do it differently. And it's really hard to comprehend, but that's part of it. I think as exercise science, we've done an awesome job at figuring out what exercise does for us physically and being able to prescribe exercise to reach someone's goal. So all of you, if someone were to come to you and say, hey, I want to try and run a 5K or I want to try and lose 15 pounds, all of you would be able to prescribe them an exercise program that would reach their goals. But what we've done a terrible job is trying to tell them how to stay with it. So I think that's part of one of the issues with physical activity. We've focused so much on the cognitive measures and the cognitive aspect of the message. We've skipped how do you stick with it? What happens when you hit a snag? What happens when you have an injury? What happens when you start your program in October and then Thanksgiving happens and then Christmas happens and then New Year's happens? And how do you deal with all those setbacks? And we don't have a lot of strategies for that as exercise scientists. Behaviorists and psychologists tend to have more strategies for that, but we don't talk about that, and we don't provide our people in the field with messages about that very well. And this is the part that I sort of joke with my students about. If we go to Walmart and ask 100 people, is exercise good for you? 95 of them conservatively are going to say, yes, it's good for us. If you ask them, those same 100 people, do you exercise? Probably maybe 15, and that's being hopeful, are going to say, yes, I exercise. So we've done a great job of getting the message out there, but we haven't done a good job of making it important for them for some way. So they don't schedule it, and they don't prioritize it, and they think of it more as a leisure type thing, as something they can do when they have other time to do it. And everything else gets in the way of it. And that's part of the challenge. A lot of it is the whole country Protestant work ethic that exercise isn't necessarily work and it's not helping my life. They have that attitude towards it, and they don't feel the benefits and they don't see the benefits. And then in some places, access and understanding of what they need to do, knowing that they can just go out for a 15 or 20-minute walk and it's going to have physical health benefits. I don't think that message has gotten out there as much lately. And we know that 15 and 20-minute walks can definitely have benefits nowadays. Whereas before, you have to work hard, you feel the burn, all that other messaging that we've put into exercise. And maybe they have bad past experiences. Maybe they got out of college, went to work, stopped exercising for 5 or 6 years, tried to get back into it, went to a gym. They had somebody up on the treadmill for 10 minutes. I want you at this speed. And that speed was really, really hard, but they stuck with it. And then they gave them a circuit training program that also was really, really challenging. And they didn't really enjoy it, but they stuck with it for 3 months and then didn't really get a whole lot out of it. So now they have that past bad experience that they remember. They didn't get any benefits from it. That's another part of it. And then exercise, just by its nature, is a delayed gratification type activity. And humans aren't really good with delayed gratification type activity. You have to really be thinking ahead to know what I'm doing today. I'm not going to get direct benefits from it today. It's going to be 3 weeks, 6 weeks, 2 or 3 months down the road before I really start seeing significant benefits from the work I'm putting in today. And we're a very on-demand now society these days, so it's harder to have that delayed gratification. Those are a few things. And then habits are hard to change. They just are. Whether they're good habits or bad habits, they're hard to change. And we have so many interests competing for our time. And while our bodies were designed to move, they also feel good when we're sitting on the couch watching TV or playing video games because they're resting and they're like, oh, okay, this feels good. And you get adapted to that and that becomes the habit. And then that's hard to change. Those are a few things. There are more, but it gets super complicated. I mean, if we had all those answers, we wouldn't be talking about this. We'd be out making millions of dollars trying to get people to be physically active.
So let's say you're all powerful and you can change the system that we live in. Like, how would you go about making it so that being physically active or exercise becomes a part of everyone's daily life? Is it whether that's kind of like making everything like New York City where you can walk everywhere or something like that? I mean, I know that's kind of a big question, but
yeah,
you are the expert.
Changing the environment would have an impact. Being able to have less food deserts so people can walk and get fresh food and healthy foods with easy access to that. Public transportation can have a role in that as well. I know Greensboro has a lot of greenways and trails and things, so there's relatively easy access to that, but there might not be easy access to walk to the grocery store or walk to the neighborhood store and get that. I think insurance could play a role, whereas you could actually give people benefits for, I don't necessarily agree that Fitbits are the answer and things like that with tracking your Fitbit activity, but being able to go to the doctor and get your cholesterol taken and getting a physical and the doctor showing that, yes, you're healthy, you're of a good weight, and you have all these values, and then you can get insurance discounts for that. That might be a way to motivate people. And I think we need to take it out of that this has to be something that's hard, but make it more fun.
Mm-hmm. Do you think we need
when
to
you do something and you enjoy it, you're going to keep doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Do you think we need to start like, for instance, I know in a lot of schools and middle schools, they don't really like PE or physical activity. So maybe kind of something where like they make it much more of a focus. Do you think that would have an overall effect on the system, or?
I think it could, because a lot of our habits start young. If people aren't regular physical activity users in college, then they're likely not going to be after college. Young can definitely be a benefit. I think part of the issue in youth sports is we often use physical activity as a punishment. It's a big deal. I mean, think about it. Is what happens if you're coaching a youth sport and the kid's just not paying attention? Go run laps, go do push-ups, up downs for 10 minutes. Well, now we're making physical activity a punishment. So if you've been told your whole life from the time you're 9 until you're 18 that going and running laps is a punishment, well, I'm not going to want to do that myself when I'm just going to go and have fun. Mm-hmm. So one of the things we need to talk about with youth sports is different ways to get people to punish kids who aren't behaving. What are those things we can do? And one of the worst things you can do to a kid is sit there and watch. But if the kid's misbehaving, it might be hard to get them to just sit there. That's the challenge of it, which is why it drives me crazy when I was trying to assistant coach my 6-year-old soccer team this spring. I was like the bench coach trying to control 6 kids sitting on the sidelines. It was not pleasant. But that's part of the challenge is, yeah, definitely with youth sports and middle school, high school. Getting more fun physical education in schools, I think, can definitely have a benefit not only on health, but also on cognition, because there's a lot of evidence that physical activity and physical education classes also lead to better scores on standardized testing and better behavior in school. But I think it could have a bigger impact overall than just being physically active. But that's definitely something, having more physical education, definitely I think could be better. It's starting to come back a little bit in some places in terms of physical education in schools. We really went one way hard with none. It's starting to come back a little bit, but I think it still has a long way to go.
So there was an article that came out recently about how Harvard is considering making physical activity or some sort of having a fitness PE requirement for college students, because that used to be kind of the trend in the 20s and it's faded off now, or even I think later in the 70s it still kind of existed, but now that's not really the case. But given that you said that you want it to be something fun, like, do you think a mandatory requirement of a fitness class or physical activity is something that would kind of help people find pleasure? Or do you think it might actually do the opposite?
It depends on the amount and type of classes offered. So if you say you have to take one of these classes and you have 18 choices, and I can do a dance class, or I can do soccer, or I can do bowling, or something along those lines that gets you out in physical activity, and I can choose what I like, then I think it could be beneficial, because then you're going and finding the fun in what you want to do. But if it's like everybody has to do this Couch to 5K class, and by the end of the semester, everybody has to run a 5K. For some people that might work, but for others that's not going to work at all. It's going to make them feel worse and probably be more like punishment and then not want to do it. So a lot of it depends on choice, in a sense that you have a choice to do it. And that's the challenge with it, because you'd have to have so many different types of classes to make sure everybody has something that they can do that's enjoyable for them.
What would you say are next steps going off of this study that we've read? I see it's paired with behavioral economics. What do you feel the next steps that are coming with this study and studies like it?
One of the things they talk about is what happens with people who have a higher level of fitness. What's going to be the difference? Or people who exercise regularly, is this going to affect them or help them? So I think we could do similar studies with different groups of people. So take college students and do this type of study. Take college students who don't exercise and college students who do exercise. See if there are differences between those two groups. The other thing I was thinking about is generally 15 minutes is an entry period, but most exercise programs want you to do 30 minutes 5 days a week at least to get to that 150 minutes of recommended exercise. So what if we were to do a program where you do a ramp from 0 to 120 for the first 15 minutes and then go from 120 to 0 for the last 15 minutes? So you get 30. What would happen then? Would that you'd be at above ventilatory threshold for a significant period of time that way, but would that last 5 minutes or so where you're just kind of enjoying it and getting muscles moving, would that lead to a positive benefit as well? So there's that kind of approach where, okay, yeah, we want to, 15 minutes is good to start, but we want to get people up to 30 minutes 5 times a week. So do we do that and ramp up and then come back down and see how that works? I think that could be a cool approach to take this to that next step of getting to 30 minutes. And then different populations with college kids, with older adults, with people who are physically active, is this approach going to be better? Or would somebody who is physically active and really likes intensity, are they going to respond better to the ramp up intensity. So you start at 0 and you end up really high. Are they going to enjoy that kind of invigorating feeling of, oh, that was a great workout?
So this question is slightly different, going towards the adherence. So what role do you think the market plays in people's perception of the benefits of physical activity? So if you turn on the news and you see someone says, oh, here's this supplement, you take it 3 times a day, you're good to go, you don't have to exercise. How do you feel that plays with people's appraisal of the importance of physical activity and exercise?
Or you drink a glass of wine and it's just like
I
drinking.
know, it just randomly came to my mind as you were talking, sorry.
Yes. Yeah. All of that drives me crazy. That's.
It drives me crazy too.
The media has to sensationalize something because they have to get clicks, they have to get stories, they have to get viewers. And the challenge is, how do you dig through that information? So, and then that just confuses other people who don't understand exercise the way we understand it, because they're like, wait, I can just drink a glass of wine and it's the same benefits of doing exercise for 30 minutes? No, you get the same anti-inflammatory benefits maybe, but none of the other benefits. Yeah, the media plays a message. I think ACSM and other organizations try and get the message out as positively as they can, but it's hard because if I go to a reporter and say, hey, I forgot this study shows that if you exercise just walking easy 5 days a week for 30 minutes, you do that for 4 or 5 months, you're going to have all these huge benefits. Nobody's going to want to sell that story because it's not exciting, it's not innovative, it's not new, it's okay, you're telling me I need to go out and do something repeatedly over and over again to get benefits. Yeah, that's about it. That's what it is. You need to go out and do something repeatedly for at least 30 minutes, 5 days a week, and you're going to get all these great, huge benefits. But people don't want to hear about that because it comes back to that we're a now society. If I can take a pill for something, sure, I'm going to take that pill for something because then I don't have to go and work hard. And it's that weird place of exercise. We had a pill that did what exercise had, we'd make trillions of dollars because the benefits are incredible for exercise. And people know it, but it's hard. It takes work.
Does anyone else have any questions?
So I've got a quick one. One thing that I thought about was in the study that you had us read, talked about the decreasing intensity exercise. Has there been any research like that into weightlifting where typically you do your hardest lift first, like you do squats, then you go to accessory exercises where it's like less taxing on the nervous system?
Right.
Is there anything like that out there?
There was. It's actually a study we did at Elon. It was quite a few years ago. It was by a student called Pete Beleza. I forget where it was published. But we looked at different ordering of the exercise. So we started with smaller muscles to bigger muscle groups, and then started big muscles to small muscles. So that same idea of like you start with squats and then you go to the accessories, or start with the accessories and then end with the squats. Trying to remember the basic results, but I think it was similar that the people enjoyed the starting with the squats and finishing with the accessories more than the other way around. Because it was that same idea that the intensity was a little bit lower, wasn't as overwhelming as the starting with squats or finishing with squats. As far as I know, there hasn't been a whole lot else done with that. I think that was one of the only few. It was just order of exercises, but there hasn't been a lot of other things done with it. But it is the way most. If you lift, that's the way you lift typically. Is you start with the big muscle groups that are typically more intense, and then go to the smaller muscle groups that you're still lifting them intensely, but it's not as intense as doing those multi-joint movements.
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask just one final question for you, Wally, before we let you go. So I love this paper, and I love, obviously, Patty's line of work with affect, but I wonder what your perspective is about sort of where it fits into the big picture relative to everything else we've talked about. So all of these determinants of whether or not somebody chooses to initiate an exercise program, and then additional things that tie into adherence. Like if you were NIH and you had $5 billion to give to exercise psychology research for exercise promotion, what percentage of that would you put towards understanding affective responses? And if it's not 100%, what are the other big things, like environmental things, like was mentioned, or locus of control, or where should we be putting our energy?
One of those, if I were a czar again, type question. I think a lot of it should go to understanding how people feel during and following exercise, and then how that relates to future exercise behavior. That's where we're starting to go, but there haven't been a lot of papers that have looked at response to exercise from a feeling perspective, and then does that predict future exercise behavior. I think Williams, who's at Brown, has done 2 or 3 papers on that, but there hasn't been a lot of other studies on that. So is there some kind of way that we can use this information, manipulate how people feel during exercise, and then take that next step to see if that predicts actual adherence? Because we have that link that exercise intensity influences how we feel, and we think how we feel about exercise relates to adherence, but we haven't made that causal link yet. Where we need money for that, because that's a big study. So we need to get 100 people, split them into 2 groups, one that we manipulate that they feel good during exercise or at the end of exercise, one that they manipulate feeling bad, and then try and give them some sort of prescription that they're going to try and do for the next 6 months, and then track their adherence of how well they do. Does the group that had that enjoyment at the end do better over the course of 6 months or not? Because that's the next step we need. We don't have that link. So I think that is where a lot of the money could go. And then we also need to understand, I think personality issues might play a role as well. Ekakakis has also done this idea of the preference for and tolerance of intensity, exercise intensity questionnaire. So do you prefer or tolerate high intensity exercise or not? And I think that may change people's patterns. So if you're somebody who really prefers and can tolerate high intensity exercise, and I assign you to this decreasing intensity exercise, you may not enjoy that as much as the other way around, because you want to end on that high intensity, because you really prefer and enjoy high intensity. So that may be where you want to go with it. So there's some issues with personality factors as well that I think could be addressed with that. But we do need to make that link.
So that leads to my last question, B. Set it up. So you mentioned personality, but I just wonder, because I have no idea, Wally, is there any evidence of genetic predictors of affective responses to exercise?
Not that I know of.
So if there are none, I mean, maybe nobody's just looked, but if there are none, then that would suggest that physiologically, biochemically, we should all have sort of the same affective response to exercise. But what you're suggesting is that there are personality variables maybe, or preferences that might moderate so that we don't all have the same response.
Yeah, no, we definitely don't. We might all have the same physiological response to it, but I don't think we all interpret that response the same. Like I go out for a workout and I do intervals and I get done with it and I'm like, oh, that was great. But somebody else who hasn't done what I do, they go out and do intervals and they're like, oh my God, I'm going to die. It's horrible type feeling. So even though we have the same biochemical reactions, our interpretations of that are different.
But so you think that is trainable? Like you think that person who has the negative response to intensity is because they're not exposed to it? I'm just curious if maybe there's something that's predisposing them to have a negative affective response to exercise that we have to consider as we think about how we're designing programs.
Yeah, I would think so. I know hemispheric asymmetry measured with EEG has been tested in that, but it's hard to test during and following exercise. But there is this predisposition to, if you're more right frontally activated, you tend to see more, you experience more negative emotions to negative stimuli, and vice versa for the left frontally activated. So I know there are predispositions with that. We've tried to do it in exercise, but it's been complicated to get that done. There are a few studies out there that have looked at it and suggested that those who are more right frontally activated experience exercise more negatively, but it hasn't been a lot of stuff out there.
Anybody else? Well, thank you so much, Wally. We really appreciate it. And I'll make you famous. I'll put you out on YouTube, all right?
Exciting. Now I can just do this as a lecture for my class someday.
Yeah, that's perfect. All right. Thanks, Wally. I appreciate it.
We'll see y'all later.
Thanks.
Thank you.